to the head of the Department of English, Senior Faculty Member of the Government Arts and Science College, Nandanam, academicians, guest speakers, scholars, aspirants, students, and my fellow colleagues and friends, a pleasant morning to you. On behalf of our department and our institution, I cordially invite you all the sixth day. First of all, I extend my hearty congratulations to Rupana ma'am, Dr. Bama Rani, the conveners of this webinar series on living through literature, conventions, and connotations. And I'm very much elated to introduce today's guest speaker, Prof.Arunkumar, who is a man of virtue, simplicity, and spirituality. Well, Mr. Arunkumar serves as an assistant professor of English at MCC College, Chennai, as he holds various responsibilities at the college, especially as the alumni and public relations officer. His areas of interest: apocalyptic studies, translation and mission of literature. He has presented numerous articles and various intra and international conferences and seminars. And he has visited various universities abroad for academic partnership. And he worked on a couple of United Board projects in the recent past. And now he is currently involved in a advancing project for the preparation of English books for the college students of Tamil Nadu. Like you aspirants, I'm looking forward for today's session on apocalyptic imagination and trajectories of English literature. Now I hand over the session to the guest speaker, Mr. Arunkumar Joseph. Over to you, sir. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, madam. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Audible, sir.
Okay, madam. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank and praise my Lord Jesus Christ for giving me life and breath to live today amidst Corona outbreak, to speak with you right now. Secondly, I thank the organizers of this prestigious institution for inviting me to be part of this great webinar. I'm in no way on par with the distinguished speakers of 5 other days who have enormous knowledge and experience. I consider myself a fellow researcher like most of you. I'm going to share my personal view of my area of research with you. That is all. Thirdly, I thank all of you for kindly participating in today's webinar. Why study apocalypse? What is the reason for studying apocalypse? Well, many people ask me this question. Why do we need to study about apocalypse? Isn't it something which is always connected with negativity? Isn't apocalypse, the apocalyptic movies that we see, always connected with destruction and many other things? Now, I too had this question in my mind. I was researching for some years. When people asked me, I too had this question in my mind, but that interest actually sprung in my heart several years ago. But my next slide has the answer for it. If you read what's written on the wall of a bookshop called Wonderful Bookends of Fowey, Cornwall, United Kingdom, you can clearly understand why a study on apocalypse is very important in such a time as this. If you read that, I'll read it for you. Please note, the post-apocalyptical fiction section has been moved to current affairs. And what we see around all over the world makes us understand that what we envision as apocalypse, what many writers have envisioned as apocalypse, is because become current affairs these days. There's one nice apocalyptic passage from Matthew chapter 24, written some 2000 years ago. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of wisdom. Now, all these things are happening around us, as you know, that we are living in such a time as this. What is my plan for today? I'm going to give a very brief introduction to apocalypse. I know many of my students from non-literary background, from other academic disciplines have also joined. So for their sake, I've brought in the introductory part, and later I'll be entering the literary part. Introduction to apocalypse first, types of apocalypse, and we'll be dealing with one important concept called Anthropocene. Further, we'll be having a tour across centuries, from 14th century to the modern period, to identify the apocalyptic resonances in the works of the British writers. And finally, the conclusion. The word apocalypse comes from the Greek word apocalypsis. The researcher Northrop Frye remarks that the Greek word for revelation, that is apocalypsis, has a metaphorical sense of uncovering or taking a lid off. Something which is there, but it is covered. Something which is a reality, but it is not seen. It is something like the open secret, which is kept open, but hardly any people see that. Apocalypsis or revelation means uncovering or taking a lid off. He goes on to say the apocalyptic mode of perception, both in the Bible and in secular literature, involves a seer who communicates his or her visions, and these visions that are non-verbal flashes of understanding may be deemed apocalyptic truths. These truths are not conveyed as pure spiritual states of consciousness, but through multivalent words and images. Whether it be a seer or a poet, he communicates this apocalyptic thought through his literature, through his mode of expression. One of the ancient philosophers, one of the philosophers said that the word for a poet in the older usage was Vates, V-A-T-E-S, or Vates, however you want to pronounce it. The word Vates or Vates means either a prophet or a poet. Now, this, as you know, this is from Heroes and Hero Worship. It is the word Vates symbolizes or means either a poet or a prophet or both. So, as you know, the same truth that they receive from nature or the power that we see, the supernatural power, whatever we would like to call it, they receive it and they communicate with the world which is completely insensitive. Poets, the main goal of the poets is to sensitize the hearts of the people for things happening around. Now, if you make me and my poet friend walk on a road and come back, probably I observe a lot of new shops, a lot of new eateries and so on. But my poet friend would look at the world or the short trip in a very different way. They are sensitized and they will sensitize the world. Furthermore, as apocalyptic characteristically brings the reader to the end of time, it is often linked with eschatology, which is a study of the knowledge of, or a knowledge of last things. This is one of the main proponent of this research area, John J. Collins. He has written a book on apocalyptic imagination. He's a professor at Yale Divinity School. There's yet another researcher, Morton D. Pally, who has done enormous research in this area. He is emeritus professor at Berkeley. He remarks that the poets of the Romantic period drew with great familiarity upon the situation, figures, and language of the book of Revelation of the Bible. The book of Revelation and some other books in the Bible are highly apocalyptic. They talk about end times, one of which I just projected at the beginning. It talks about wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom rising against kingdom, famine, pestilences, and whatnot that will come in the end times. Now, this researcher points out one of the periods, that is romantic period, the poets drew with great familiarity upon the situation, figures, and language of the book of Revelation. Now, not only the romantic poets, but also many poets have done that. That is what we are going to do today. We're going to look at literature from Chaucer through Eliot in what I call as the apocalyptic rendering of life. An apocalyptic imagination seeks redressal of wrongs. It is not just to terrify a group of people or terrify the readers, but it is there, its main agenda is to seek redressal of wrongs. Again, sensitize their hearts to what they are doing. When we talk about apocalyptic imagination, we also need to juxtapose it with ideal imagination. The power of imagination is to tap the potential in us to envision an ideal which is good for the world, the poet, and the society. Now, an ideal imagination goes like this. It transports the poet. It makes him envision an ideal which is good for the world, the poet, and the society. But apocalyptic imagination, per se, will operate on the cause and effect premise. If you do this, this will happen. This is what you have been doing to the nature, to the world, and this is what will happen ultimately as a reciprocation. In the history of mankind, apocalyptic predictions have always happened. If you look at the ancient histories of the world, of civilizations, you can understand that apocalyptic predictions have always happened when the moral order of the world has been disrupted by human intervention. When the moral order of this world had been disrupted by human intervention. Take anything, it can be the Noah's flood and so on, and many other predictions have always happened when the moral order of the world had been disrupted by human intervention, inviting God's wrath, or what we call as the righteous indignation. But here nature takes the revenge here. Apocalyptic imagination is proactive. It leads to spiritual, social, political, and moral activism. It makes a person's heart to be sensitized to what he's doing as a community, as a policy, as a society, individually, spiritually, morally, and so on. It shows to him who he is. Basically, as it is said, literature holds a faithful mirror up to nature, life. And here you can find apocalyptic imagination holds a faithful mirror to the moral nature of human beings. There are types of apocalypse that we can study from literature. Religious apocalypse, scientific apocalypse, warfare apocalypse, social apocalypse, plague apocalypse, nature apocalypse. There's a small quote at the end. There is no favoritism during a nature apocalypse, just destructions. Now we have few apocalypses here, but there could be more. I'm just taking very little to do our study. Religious apocalypse, scientific apocalypse, warfare apocalypse, social apocalypse, plague apocalypse, and nature apocalypse. As I told you, we need to understand one important concept. I know most of you would know it. For the sake of the students who are listening to us, I'm just sharing this. The period of time during which human activities have had an environmental impact on the earth, regarded as constituting a distinct geological age. Most scientists agree that humans have had a hand in warming Earth's climate since the Industrial Revolution. Some even argue that we are living in a new geological epoch dubbed Anthropocene. From this description, you would understand that Anthropocene is an epoch, a detrimental interference of man in the meaningful interface between human and the non-human. So this particular description highlights that industrial revolution or man's crass materialism is the beginning of what you call as Anthropocene. One of my teachers was talking in a webinar some time ago, some days ago. He was pointing it out. He's doing a research right now on this. And he feels that it is not only the industrial revolution that's the beginning of Anthropocene, but it is the creation of state societies much before industrial revolution, which actually is the reason for what you call as environmental degradation. You would be familiar with this diagram or the chart as it is. There are two kinds of approach: egological versus ecological. Egological is authoritarian, dualistic, unsustainable, delusional, mechanistic, self-destructive, unwise, imbalanced, and power-seeking. You can find man at the top and everything else at the bottom for him to control or to dominate. On the other side, we have an ecological model, which is democratic, holistic, sustainable, compassionate, natural, regenerative, wise, balanced, interdependent. The word interdependent is very important because in this ecological setup, you can clearly understand that man is not the master, but is a part of a very huge chain, very huge system. It's called as the ecosystem. In these days, you can find the word ecosystem being used in secular other terms as well, other contexts as well. For example, ecosystem of a company, ecosystem of an association, which means every person in that order is very important. The CEO, the housekeeping man is as important as the CEO is. The typist is as important as the senior manager is. Now that is a setup in which the entire natural world is established. Every person, every small little organism is very important. The earthworm or a parasite is as important as a human being is. To justify that point, I'm taking you to the next slide. One of the stories in BBC Earth, a researcher from the University of Washington, Seattle, Professor Louis Zaman says, take out all the parasites across the ecosystem and it probably will collapse. Remove all the parasites from the earth, he believes the entire world would collapse at the earliest. Have you ever imagined that parasites are very important? We are trying our best to get rid of them. The entire story goes in that tone, how to get rid or the human beings interested in getting rid of parasites and so on. How important parasites are. Have you ever thought about it? We'd be thinking how important this man is or that position is. Have you ever thought that you are part of an ecosystem in which a parasite is very important? If that parasite is going to go away, you can't be on this planet. That is the importance of every single entity in this world. It is wrongly thought that the Creator made human beings as lords, but the word Lord actually meant stewardship. It meant a steward, someone who takes care. Human beings become part of nature and not above nature. They become part of nature and never above nature. More responsibility and duty rather than a power position. These are some of the writers who projected pre-lapsarian and post-lapsarian consciousness in their works. Let me tell you what pre-lapsarian and post-lapsarian is. Pre-lapsarian is before fall, and post-lapsarian is after fall. When you talk about fall, it is actually Adam being driven out of the Garden of Eden, which symbolically represents human beings going away from being in tune with nature. By their disobedience, by their egoistic attitudes, people moving away from being in tune or becoming out of tune with nature, people becoming out of tune with nature means they fall. So it is pre-lapsarian, before fall, and after fall. There are a few writers who projected this consciousness in their works, starting with Geoffrey Chaucer of the 14th century, John Milton, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Yeats, William Shakespeare, Blake, Wordsworth, Charles Dickens, T.S. Eliot. Well, this is not chronologically arranged, just for the sake of the flow of the argument, the flow of the talk, I've just set it that way. Now, one of the significant contributions of Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is the first 18 lines of the general prologue. It is often called as the Reverie passage. Or it means regreening, which is a process of transformation. The Reverie passage, Reverie means regreening, a process of transformation. Chaucer perceives this world in terms of a seamless unity where the divine, natural, and the human worlds are seen as a wonderful continuum. He envisages or envisions the divine, natural, and the human worlds as one wonderful continuum. Every spring, nature regreens herself. God sends message through nature that human beings also should regreen themselves by rejuvenating their consciousness. That's when men go on pilgrimages. Spring has great power. That message, the power of the Creator, is sent through spring, and that message goes from spring to nature, from nature to the insects and birds, and from the insects and birds to the animals and to the human beings. And that chain of influence sent by the Creator or sent from the nature is passed on through all these small little agents of nature and at last reaches the human beings. And when they are regreened and rejuvenated during the spring season, they are spiritually awakened and they go on pilgrimages. That's the story that we see at the beginning. That impacts the consciousness of human beings also. We are part of one great chain, one regenerative process. The problem of modern man is that he has gone far away from this regenerative process of being one with nature. Chaucer in his Reverie passage suggests that a meaningful interaction with the natural world is a true source of spiritual inspiration and impetus. Humans, by meditating on the wonderful aspects of nature, can establish a communion with the divine through a spiritual and aesthetic preoccupation with nature. Nature is not far from spirituality. It is part of one world. The Reverie passage can definitely be called a passage of hope, as it foregrounds a definite possibility of the post-lapsarian consciousness. Have a glimpse of a pre-lapsarian, and with that glimpse, which in itself is a moment of spiritual illumination. Now, this Reverie passage showcases a glimpse of pre-lapsarian world, a world before fall. And that glimpse in itself, I believe it's a spiritual illumination. It can transform the fragmented consciousness of a man into a wholesome one. This enables the human consciousness to retrace its steps to the pre-lapsarian condition, that is before fall, where the human and the natural enjoyed the most meaningful bond with the divine and spiritual world. It is taking back these people, the people who were illumined, back to a meaningful bond between human, natural, and the spiritual worlds. Chaucer's world is not governed by an apocalyptic vision that human beings have irrevocably strayed away from their ultimate source, which is God. On the contrary, Chaucer argues that the natural world, comprising both of the flora and the fauna, provides humanity with not only inspiration but also an effective means by which human beings will move away from a post-lapsarian state to a pre-lapsarian state. You don't find an apocalyptic shock apocalyptic symbols and imageries in Chaucer in the 14th century. But he just actually portrays how a pre-Lapsarian world would be when people were part of this triad, the beautiful arrangement of these three worlds together: the divine, the natural, and the human. As long as human beings are in tune with the world of nature, they can instinctively and intuitively experience the grandeur of God, which is always there as a latent power, only to become manifest by the spiritual efforts of humans. When we see nature materially, we will exploit it. When we see nature spiritually, we will protect it. Well, as you can see, when April, with its sweet-smelling showers, has pierced the drought of March to the root and bathed every vein of the plants in such liquid by which power the flower is created. Liquid here symbolizes a cleansing power that happens, that cleanses human beings of their lethargy and insensitivity. Then folk long to, you follow the green lines, then folk long to go on pilgrimages. They long, it comes from within their hearts. They are rejuvenated. They become part of this one regreening process. The nature regreens, spring sends energy into the veins of plants, and that energy goes into insects and birds and animals and human beings. At last, they are also rejuvenated and they go on pilgrimages. Finally, they go to a Blessed Martyr who helped them when they were sick. The sickness clearly talks about nescience, which is opposite of wisdom. It's a spiritual sickness. Now we're moving, the purpose of apocalyptic imagination is to constantly posit an ideal or suggest it through the medium of poetic language. It constantly posits an ideal and shows where we have fallen, where human beings have fallen. Following Chaucer's Reverie passage, which is not ominously apocalyptic, Milton's Paradise Lost occupies a pivotal position. The poet vividly and with conviction portrays the post-Lapsarian conditions of humans. We're entering the religious apocalypse. In Paradise Lost, Book 9, you can follow the red lines. The earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe, that all was lost. The earth felt the wound for the first time when humans parted their relationship with nature and started warring against nature. And nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe. It gave signs through famines, pestilences, through whatnot, that everything was lost. The consequence of our harsh, rash reactions tampers with the moral order, creating chaotic conditions and situations. After the fall, the earth created her own binaries. After the fall, the earth created her own binaries. For example, rainfall versus destructive storm, snowfall versus avalanche, fire versus devastative forest fire. These are the signs of woe, the binaries created by nature. The other ones are useful, and these binaries are hazardous, the signs of woe. Nature started giving signs of woe that all was lost. But one good news is the religious apocalypse always gives hope. It points out the mistake and then gives hope. One significant feature of Milton's apocalyptic perception is his boundless hope that God, through his Son, will make humans regain the blissful seat they have lost. You can see that in Paradise Lost, Book 1, the lines in green. In other words, the title Paradise Lost has within itself its opposite, that is, Paradise Regained, through these promising lines. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man, the Son of God, restore us and regain the blissful seat. Since literature showcases difference between the ideal and the practical, the role of apocalyptic imagination in literature serves the purpose of extolling the virtues of the ideal world and to satirize the pedestrian modes of living in the practical life. As I told you earlier, Apocalyptic imagination extols the virtues of the ideal world and satirizes the pedestrian modes of our life, owing to Nietzsche's, as I told you, the binary of wisdom, the opposite of wisdom. So in Milton's case, hope is enshrined in the discourses of apparent hopelessness. The Victorian period was a period of both material prosperity and spiritual vacuity. A lot of material prosperity happened, but also there was spiritual vacuity. So the poets of the Victorian age were thoroughly dissatisfied with the immoral and amoral attitudes of the Victorian society. Needless to say, religious poets naturally took recourse to the apocalyptic mode when they wanted to bring about a change in this world, when they saw people going after crass materialism. The religious poets took recourse to the apocalyptic mode of perceiving the world. One of the significant literary signposts of the Victorian period is Hopkins's God's Grandeur. It's a brilliant Italian sonnet that talks about the ideal and its binary, the pathetic practical. And it's also about faith, which makes us believe that it is God's work, ultimately. And so his moral order can never be thwarted. The poem begins with a brilliant statement of faith. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. These lines stress the importance of human effort in making the grandeur of God a visible as well as a visionary experience as it lies deep down things. After having made a statement, Hopkins follows it with a significant question in which all the words are monosyllables, which create a thud-like effect. If you look at those lines, he asks a rhetorical question, why, wait, I'll show you which line it is, yeah, fourth line. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? All monosyllabic words to create a thud-like effect. This is a question that will possibly make the Victorians wake up from their spiritual slumber and look at life positively and constructively. But instead of considering the power, love, and glory of God, Victorians are complacent with their materialistic progress. Their quest for materialism falls into a ruthless routine, creating a terrible monotony. Hopkins calls it, Hopkins, in the words of Hopkins, generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can food feel being shod. Hopkins also adds that we have dirtied ourselves with material progress, making the vital spiritual soil barren. Now, keep this word barren in your mind, and you'll be able to connect with a future poem. Hopkins' imagination sees the separation from God in terms of an ecological relationship between nature and the humans. As an expression of apocalyptic imagination, these lines appear to be most pessimistic. But in the assisted part of the sonnet, Hopkins counters all the negative impacts caused by crass materialism by suggesting that the spiritual essence in the world actually remains intact. Whatever the man does to the world goes back to him. It hits back on him. But at the same time, the world has its spiritual essence intact, which the man has long forgotten. For all this, nature is never spent. There lives in the dearest freshness deep down things, and though the lost lives of the black west wind, O morning at the brown brink eastward sprints, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. Almost an echo from Shelley in the poem Ode to the West Wind, where Shelley says, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Hopkins speaks about the night giving away to day, dispelling all forms of darkness. The Holy Spirit broods over this crooked world with a warm breast, showcasing the boundless love of God. But the word barren, if you keep in mind, as I asked you to keep in mind, the word barren land clearly resonates the present condition of the world. What human beings have done to it. They made it infertile, they made it bare. You can see these two words in a poem that we are going to deal with. It anticipates Eliot's Wasteland. Moving on to Second Coming, we'll quickly move forward. Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. It's a completely apocalyptic poem. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart and center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drawn, the best lack all conviction, while the West are full of passionate intensity. It's a completely apocalyptically charged poem. Here the falconer is God, and the falcon cannot hear anymore. The voice of nature isn't heard anymore. How many of us, when we look around, when we see an animal, can understand the language of that animal? How many of us, when we look at a leaf or a tree which is dry, can understand the yearning of of that tree or plant? We have gone far away, right? We use plants for ornamental purposes. We use animals to just have a pet. But do we understand the language? I remember there was one time when a dog was looking with so much sadness in its eyes. When some of us were trying to understand what it's trying to say, and its eyes pointed out towards a tap of water, where every person comes and takes water and goes, but it doesn't know how to open the water tap. Now, that understanding of the language is very important. That clearly shows how far or how near you and I are to nature. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. The distance from spirituality made things fall apart in that world. The spiritual binding essence was lost in the post-lapsarian period. We'll quickly move to the social apocalypse. From Shakespeare's As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 1. Just read the lines in red. Sweep on, you fat and greasy citizens. 'Tis just the fashion, where do you look? Upon that poor and broken and bankrupt there? Thus most invectively he pierceth through the body of the country, city, court. Yea, and of this our life, swearing that we are mere usurpers, tyrants, and what's worse, to fright the animals and to kill them up in their assigned and native dwelling place. What are we actually doing? You have Jacques here questioning. Utter degradation is what it's happening here in this forest of Arden. As we know, forest of Arden is an ideal landscape. Jacques' response to Duke Senior is something that problematizes the pastoral. We know that pastoral talks about the impact of nature on human beings, but it doesn't talk about the impact of nature, the impact of human beings on nature. He says to them, you're ruining these people's lives. Upon that poor, broken, and bankrupt there, poor people. Now we encounter two kinds of people here. We can give names to them. One are the foresters, the other are hunters. The foresters are people who live in the forest. They live in the forest, they live in harmony with nature, they make use of nature, they eat from nature, they survive on nature, but they don't exploit nature. They live in harmony with nature, they eat from nature, they are survived by nature, but they don't exploit nature. To the contrary, the hunters are people who exploit nature in mass numbers, without any heart, ruthlessly exploiting nature. Those people are hunters. You have the difference, the foresters versus hunters. Jacques calls them mere usurpers. You just usurp, you're tyrants, West human beings. What do we learn from here? Which group are we in? We need to assess ourselves. We also have an example from Daniel Quinn's novel Ishmael. There are two kinds of people, leavers and takers. Leavers are people who make use of nature, but they leave something back for the future generations. That's what you call a sustainable development. But takers are people who exploit, who take everything from nature. They don't think about the future. They don't want to think about the future. Are we part of the usurpers and tyrants, or are we part of people who just make use of nature and continue living, continue protecting it, and think about sustainable development? Yeah, there's a quote at the top. You can just read the line in the red by Kelly Dagan, while also recalling the wider world outside the country dances. Jacques recalls the wider world outside are merry, our dances, our routine, our happiness, our joy. We in our imagination we have a world in our minds, but there is an outside world that Jacques wants to bring to their minds. And the second paragraph, you can see Jacques assumes the role of an eco-critical core commentator when he attacks wrong attitudes and their consequences, exploitative actions. Though many critics consider him as an intellectual, merely articulating thought processes, one can see him process of spiritual illumination. Achieving a beautiful bond between mind and heart, Jacques both appreciates life and depreciates false perception of man. Jacques' voice in The Forest of Arden is a voice of subversion, which will constantly showcase the emptiness of a shallow ecological worldview. Moving on to Blake's London. I wandered through each charted street near where the charted Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. Here Blake talks about a developed modern London with its chartered streets, well-planned chartered streets, and even chartered Thames, River Thames, a river which is chartered. As you read these lines, the word chartered talks about Anthropocene again, the detrimental interference of human beings in the beautiful interface between human and the non-human. Human intervention is what we see here. The River Thames and the streets become objects of commercial exploitation. Look around your rivers in your cities and towns. What is it now? It is an object of commercial exploitation. Wordsworth says in Westminster Bridge that the river glideth at its own sweet will. The river glideth at its own sweet will. Now, what has happened here to River Thames is that it has become an object of transit from one place to the other. It has been reduced from being itself to being an object of transit from one place to the other. Definitely, we have tampered with nature. In the sixth line, you can clearly see. Sixth line, it goes like this. In every infant's cry of fear. In every infant's cry of fear. That is ultimate Anthropocene. There is no sustainable development because the infants cry. The future cry, the future generations cry because everything has been tampered with. Everything has been exploited. There is no resources kept for the future. If you go down to the next poem, the world is too much with us. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not, great God. I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn, so might I, standing on this pleasantly, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his breathed horn. This is from The World is Too Much with Us by Wordsworth. You can clearly see here that the lack of sensibility and lack of sensitivity is seen in the hearts of people. Crass materialism will make humans more mechanized and more like automatons than human beings. It is like something precious that has been given in the hands of human beings, but they exploit it, tamper with it, and completely dismantle it to pieces. Without any heart, there's no connection between the heart and the mind. Crass materialism will make humans more mechanized, and more like automatons than human beings. Moving to Charles Dickens's Hard Times. Now we're going to only read the line in red. In this life, we want nothing but facts. Sir, nothing but facts. This is the line which has a powerful apocalyptic resonance. Where our world is going. In this life, we want nothing but facts. Sir, nothing but facts. Unfortunately, we live in a world which wants only facts. Only facts always. But at the same time, we know that the world is full of simulations. We talk about simulations these days. We talk about social constructs these days. Nietzsche even points out that there are no facts, only interpretations. There are no facts, only interpretations. Therefore, when we highlight these, when we highlight only facts, we lose intuition, we lose instinct, we lose creativity, etc. When we highlight only facts, we lose intuition, instinct, and creativity. Ancient Indian Tamil wisdom says, Yennum Eluthum Kannena Tagum. Yennum Eluthum Kannena Tagum. Now we have a lot of interpretations for this, but one of the prime interpretation which I liked, which connects with our topic, goes like this. Unless you strike a balance between mathematical sciences and humanities, it would be very dangerous to the society. If you're just concentrating only on science, and you don't focus much on your studies related to life, studies related to life or your heart or your mind, now actually that's leading to a dangerous society. Who are those people who created all these poisonous gases and atomic bombs and nuclear weapons? People who were not morally rooted, who were not much involved in humanities, no much study on life, but rather a lot of study has gone into scientific knowledge. Their mind was very much knowledgeable, but their hearts have become cold. So this is what we can see from here. And moving on to our last poem, T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. One can easily argue that all the pessimism of the Victorian age crystallizes in a poem called The Wasteland. All the pessimism of Victorian age crystallizes in a poem called The Wasteland, which was published in the year 1922, 4 years from the First World War. The first lines of the first section, titled The Burial of the Dead and the Wasteland, is a conscious echo of what is seen in the Reverie passage of Chaucer. By now you would have understood, you would have seen the word April. It's a conscious echo of what is seen in the Reverie passage of Chaucer, only that the echo is pathetically divorced from the happy state of Chaucer's Reverie. There is an echo, but this echo has divorced itself completely from the happy state of Chaucer's Reverie, where April was one of the beautiful months, with vernal showers, with spring and so on. Eliot begins his poem by categorically stating that April is the cruelest month. It's no longer the beautiful month of spring. It is the cruelest month. One sees that T.S. Eliot apocalyptically takes on the wonderful hope and faith in the Reverie passage. April is a month when the vernal showers not only wet the earth, but also invigorates the soil, thereby enabling things to come to vibrant life. But in the modern wasteland, the memory of the month of April and its practical and symbolic resonances are completely lost. You can see lilacs out of dead land, dull roots, dried tubers. Where is that happy paradise gone? Where has the invigoration, rejuvenation, restoration that happens by spring is gone? The memory of the month of April and its practical and symbolic resonances are completely lost. The wastelanders either faintly remember the symbolic overtones of spring season or totally indifferent to its implications. So mixing memory and desire becomes a problematic experience. What is the memory of the spring? It is always beautiful and how it used to be. Memory of the spring season, like a distorted image, reflects the harsh realities of the modern period. Memory of the spring season should lead to rejuvenative impulses as in Chaucer's everyday passage. But what's happening here? Where their desires run to the contrary. They do have a memory, but the desire runs contrary. Repentance becomes temporary when desires overtake. The wastelanders are overtaken by desire rather than the memory of the past. They don't learn from lessons from history. Here, spring comes every year and goes without doing anything. Spring comes every year and goes without doing anything. Or rather, because they are dull and they don't care about it. Because they have divorced themselves from the natural world. There's one beautiful continuum, divine, natural, and the human. They have separated themselves from all these. They are living in their own individualistic worlds. And they are in no way able to understand what's happening in the world of nature. Spring comes every year and goes without doing anything, or rather because they are dull and they don't care about it. It goes like this. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? What is this stony rubbish here? It is the heart and mind of human beings. Nothing seems to grow out of the heart and mind of human beings. The spring season cannot have any influence over this heart. No matter how beautiful the spring is, human beings are connected only with their own selves. I remember there was one time when we were traveling near a river, and it was a very beautiful scene like I've never seen in my life. Unfortunately, to see very many little kids around there hooked to their mobile phones. They have never seen such a beautiful thing in a natural scenario. They have not seen such a beautiful natural scene. They are just glued to their mobile phones. And I'm reminded of this. When even spring comes, these wastelanders in this poem, it doesn't do anything to them. It just comes and goes, that's all. It's another scene, it's another beautiful evening, that's all. The spring season cannot have any influence over their heart. What we know is just a heap of broken images. The poets are just the pointlessness of modern life by foregrounding the meaningless of man-woman relationship and all side of human society. It is significant to note that the apocalyptic imagination of Eliot is hugely negative in its import as he portrays the bleakness in every human situation, suggesting the fractured nature of human existence, while quoting the biblical expression, a heap of broken images. This is what they are, heap of broken images. Things fall apart, center cannot hold. Eliot suggests that the unspiritual condition in modern wasteland is irrevocable. Eliot does give a way out by suggesting religion and spirituality as the panacea for all spiritual ills, only to conclude that humans have become apathetic to moral issues. The shade of the red rock is the shade of the church. Mind you, they're talking to English audience. The shade of the red rock is a shade of the church, which represents here religion, spirituality, which provides spiritual succor to earnest seekers. He laments and gives the call to the people to come under the shade of this red rock. The title Burial of the Dead takes its name from a fertility cult rite. Fertility is apparently dead during winter, and so it is buried deep to create an impression that fertility can never come back. But every spring season, the dead fertility god is resurrected to usher in the onset of spring. But in Eliot's The Wasteland, these rays of hope do not augur well for the wastelanders. It is not going to be restored. Eliot considers all the cities of the world as unreal, by which he means artificial and superficial. People meaninglessly participate in hectic pace of material life only to realize that they are deeply unhappy. They take part in a lot of celebrations and joy, but deep down in their hearts, they're unhappy. because they are not part of the system that would provide them the true meaning of life, true purpose of life, true joy of life. They've gone away from all the other important words that has to be knit together. Saint Mary Woolnoth, a church is readily available for seekers to unravel the mysteries of the world. But the poor plight is, the bell that rings at Saint Mary Woolnoth have become a mere indicator of time. No one takes it as a clarion call of humanity to come to religion, spiritualize themselves. Alluding to Dante, Eliot sees the presence of numerous dead souls, what we see around even today, numerous dead souls, having neither power nor interest in reviving spiritual matters. The last section of the Burial of the Dead universalizes the wastelandish nature of Europe through the character Stetson. The character Stetson here can mean not only every man, but also the idea of stasis, which in the context of wasteland might refer to stagnation. In a world of hypocrisies, half measures, indistinct aims and goals, what one can expect is only a mirage of hope and vitality. In a world of hypocrisies, you can never expect hope or vitality. You can look at the words and sentences highlighted and read, which clearly has the apocalyptic resonance in it. The dead tree, the cricket, which is supposed to bring good news of rains, doesn't bring any relief. There is dry stone. Everything is dry in the wasteland. This is in complete contradiction with what Chaucer talked about in his Reverie passage about April and spring. Well, apart from T.S. Eliot, few more people have talked about apocalypse. D.H. Lawrence is a poet who's endowed with apocalyptic imagination. He's a man who constantly said that we need to have a vital relationship with the non-human. He deals with this in his poem, The Triumph of the Machine. For example, Orwell's 1984 also stands as a political apocalypse. Warfare apocalypse, you have a lot of examples in English literature. English literature abounds in warfare apocalypse. For example, Henry V, who glorifies wars and so on. Coming to my conclusion, apocalypse is the single most powerful metaphor that the contemporary environmental imagination has at its disposal. Buell says, apocalypse is the single most powerful master metaphor that the contemporary environmental imagination has at its disposal. If you go to the second sentence, you can see the ultimate purpose of apocalyptic imagination is to create a happy synthesis between the non-human and the human world. The ultimate purpose of apocalyptic imagination is to create a happy synthesis between the non-human and the human world, obviously using fear as a tool, fear or warning, as opposed to the ideal imagination. It is possible then to study the operation of apocalyptic imagination in English literature as a thread that connects each age and the literature that it produced. In a broad spectrum of English literature, Chaucer and Eliot are literary milestones. One can see the degeneration of English culture through an analysis of poems belonging to distinct historical periods by poets who do not share a common aesthetic. Though we study poets who do not share a common aesthetic, still we are able to see how the degradation happens, how they moved away slowly and slowly from the moral order. So an eco-critical reading of English literature can distinctly see the operation of apocalyptic appraisals of human society, creating both positive and negative images. And one can say with some confidence that the hope that one sees in the beginning of English literature seems to fade away as Western civilization marches ahead only temporally and materially. I'll repeat that again. One can clearly say with some confidence that the hope that one sees in the beginnings of English literature, Chaucer, 14th century, seems to fade away as a Western civilization marches ahead only temporally and materially. My thank you slide alludes to the thrust of the whole main talk, which is interconnectedness. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Arun.
Thank you, ma'am.
And now here there are a few questions,
Yes,
Arun.
ma'am.
And here Ms. Anupama has sent a question. Can you please suggest some contemporary Indian writers having apocalyptic resonance?
Okay.
Should I repeat it,
I
Arun?
got it, ma'am. I got the question. Well,
Okay, fine.
honestly, I didn't, so far, I have not gone into the Indian writers yet, but there is one interesting American writer, Cormac McCarthy. It's written a novel called as The Road, which has very great apocalyptic resonance in it. But definitely, I'll check on Indian writers and would definitely write to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Here there is the next question from Mr. Faisal. Can we regard the movies like Avengers, Mad Max, Fury, etc. as apocalyptic movies?
Yes, definitely. My research also goes further into movies as well. We do have a lot of movies such as even Almighty and on Bruce Almighty, and these, and as you said, your movies also have apocalyptic resonance. Now we cannot any of the modern, postmodern movies per se, we'll be able to actually see apocalyptic resonances. We cannot say that there is no apocalyptic resonance in any of the postmodern movies or movies of our times, contemporary times, which talks about cross materialism, or which talks about the development that hinders the human and the non-human interface.
Yeah. Shall we go to the next question, Mr.
Yes,
Arun?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The next one is from Ms. Annapurani. Could you explain the contrast between the forest and the city within this consciousness?
Yeah. Now, when you look at a forest and a city, I believe both are created equally. But in a forest, you can see that the human influence is very less. In the city, the human influence is very more. I mean, much. When you look at a forest, it is not touched much by the human beings. City, you can hardly see any trace of nature. I used to tell this to my students. We should not. I mean, we should not think that nature. I mean, we have accommodated nature into our setup, that is into our homes. If you have a small garden, you should not be proud of it. You say that I've accommodated nature into my system, into my house. But instead, you should understand that actually nature has accommodated you. Your city that is formed, created, your town, your township has been accommodated by nature into its system. So we need to understand the vast structure of nature, and also that kind of sensitivity would help us to understand the difference between a place which is not touched by human beings, a place which is touched by human beings. But you can't simply imagine, you can't say that you can live without touching anything. You still have to go back to the foresters versus hunters, takers versus leavers. Who are we going to be is the question. The foresters, they actually made use of the forest, but they never exploited the forest. But the hunters exploited the forest. Again, Daniel Quinn's leavers and takers. The takers took away, but the leavers kept something for the future generations. It is up to us to decide where we stand.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How can we try to alter our past mistake against nature?
Yes, ma'am. That's a very good question. Now, it is all with our perception of this world. We need to change our perception. Now, again, this I used to tell my students that the concept of home in our minds must change. When we have a concept of home, what do we say? That the narrow, let's say, 700 square feet, this is my home, or 1,500, 2,000 square feet, this is my home. And anything outside home or outside the border, which you call as home, you consider it to be outside. You give the word outside, and whatever that you call as home, you call it inside. I remember seeing someone, a father, telling his child, "Throw the garbage outside." According to the child, outside is not the hall, it's not the compound, it's not their garden, it is just outside their compound. Secondly, let's say you're traveling in a train. You consider that space in which you are to be your place, and you don't want to mess up with that. People eat something and then throw outside. Now, this very concept of outside and inside must be completely uh, uh, completely checked right now. You know, only when you consider the entire planet your home, not only your small place, small house. Only if you consider the entire planet as your home, will you be able to actually do something for nature, or do something for the wrongs that you've done in the past.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the answer. Again, using nature, we are surviving. How can we survive without using nature?
Yes, ma'am. The answer, which I've already told one of the participants who asked a question, it is yes, we have to use nature. Nature is very much part of us. But exploiting is a different case altogether. For example, I'm just giving a very, very crude example. In a family, let's say there is one bottle of water, and then you feel that you have to empty everything and then not leave anything for the others. One full bottle of water isn't enough for you. I mean, isn't needed for you at that moment. But out of greed, out of crass materialism, you need to take everything at one single moment, hold up wealth, so that many people who deserve it don't get it. So that kind of attitude must be changed. We need to understand that we should not exploit nature. We can make use of nature, but we should never exploit nature. And also, we should think about sustainable development. We should understand that whatever we are doing right now is going to be reflected in the future. You have Greta Thunberg and many others talking about it today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So
Arun,
Ranjani Priya would like to know, is COVID-19 a sign of apocalypse?
That's a very good question, ma'am. If you believe in the conspiracy theory that, I mean, both ways. If you believe in the conspiracy theory that COVID-19 is biologically engineered virus and it is spread across the world, definitely it is apocalyptic. But even otherwise, if you consider it as a natural phenomenon, it is natural and it comes naturally. Still, we believe it that the earth has felt the wound and it sends signs of woe. It's high time that we need to understand that these are apocalyptic times and we need to consider taking care of the nature. What we do, it comes back from nature.
yeah. So Arun, yeah, Mr. Arun, and here is the last question from Ms. P. Tamil Selvi. Sir, do you think that religious wars or cross wars are examples of apocalypse?
Well, wars and cross wars. I believe no religion, no faith, no spirituality would ever make people kill each other, destroy others' lives. Religion, spirituality, and faith always preserves all lives. whether they subscribe to the same faith or not, it preserves lives. And that's what all scripture says. But wrong interpretation of scriptures lead to of it and wrong consequences. Well, I believe because of wrong interpretations also, such war apocalypses happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Arunkumar.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So shall we wind up the question session, discussion session? Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Arun.
Mr.
Thank you, Dr. Rukma, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Baba, ma'am.
Yeah. So on behalf of the Department of English, Government Arts College for Men, Nandanam, Chennai, I would like to thank Mr. Department of English, MCC, Chennai, for such a high-sounding presentation. Thank you, participants. I would like to thank each and every participants for attending the session so keenly. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Arunkumar.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.